The glasses left on table 7 were no ordinary pair. The sleek titanium frame held lenses that shimmered with a faint inner light. To Clara Miller, a waitress drowning in her late father's debt, they were simply a lost item she had to return. Her decision to run out into a blinding rainstorm after the quiet, unassuming customer was a simple act of integrity. She had no way of knowing that the man she was chasing was the reclusive billionaire Alistair Vance, or that the glasses she held in her hand were the key to a technological revolution. This one small act of kindness was about to ignite a war with a corporate predator and change her life forever. The Cornerstone Cafe in Harmony Creek, Pennsylvania, was a place held together by routine regulars and the lingering scent of brewed coffee and yesterday's news. It was a relic of a more honest time, with its cracked red vinyl booths, a jukebox in the corner that hadn't worked since 2003, and a loyal clientele who measured their days in coffee refills. For 24-year-old Clara Miller, it was both a sanctuary and a cage. By day, she moved through the familiar chaos with a practiced, weary grace, her smile genuine even as her feet ached. By night, she sat at her small kitchen table, surrounded by a mountain of debt notices and foreclosure warnings, trying to keep her late father's dream from being crushed under the weight of his financial naivety. Her father, David Miller, had been a genius. A brilliant, eccentric electrical engineer, he had spent the last decade of his life in their dusty family workshop, consumed by a singular vision, a revolutionary solar panel technology. He called it photonic weaving, a method of embedding photovoltaic fibers into flexible, lightweight materials. It had the potential to change the world, clothing that could power your phone sales, that could power a ship. He had poured everything into it, his time, his savings and loans secured against the workshop itself. What he hadn't done was patent it properly or find a real investor. He had died of a sudden heart attack 6 months ago, leaving Clara with a legacy of brilliant, half-finished prototypes and a pile of debt that was now her personal avalanche. The bank, pressured by a larger financial group, wanted its money. The foreclosure auction for the workshop, and with it, her father's life's work, was in 2 weeks. Every coin, every crumpled dollar bill she earned at the diner was a desperate, insufficient sandbag against a rising tide. It was on a dreary, rain-lashed Tuesday that the quiet man first came in. He was in his late 40s, dressed in a simple, well-worn tweed jacket and dark jeans. He didn't fit the usual profile of a local or a passing trucker. There was a quiet intensity about him, a stillness that seemed to absorb the diner's noisy energy. He sat in a corner booth, Clara's section, and ordered black coffee and a bowl of soup. He nursed the coffee for 2 hours, saying nothing, his gaze fixed on a small, sophisticated tablet, his brow furrowed in deep concentration. Clara treated him with the same polite, unobtrusive service she gave everyone. She refilled his coffee without asking, noticed when his soup was finished, and brought the check with a quiet, "No rush, sir." He seemed to her a man lost in a world of his own, a scholar or a writer, perhaps, and she felt a strange, quiet kinship with his focused solitude. This man was, in fact, Alistair Vance. He was not a writer. He was the reclusive, legendary founder of Vance Capital, a venture capital firm so powerful and so secretive it was known in Silicon Valley as the Ghost. Alistair was a kingmaker, a man who could turn a garage startup into a global phenomenon with a single check. He never did interviews. He never attended conferences. He operated through a network of trusted lieutenants. He was in Harmony Creek, a town he'd chosen for its obscurity, for one reason: to conduct a final incognito due diligence on a local robotics firm he was considering acquiring. He used the Cornerstone Cafe as his base of operations, a perfect anonymous vantage point to observe the town's rhythms and the company's employees, who often came in for lunch. He was a predator, silently assessing his prey, and his decision would be worth billions. And he was at his core a deeply cynical man, convinced by a lifetime of pitches and betrayals that every person he met had an angle. When he was ready to leave, he paid with cash, leaving a surprisingly generous $50 tip on a $7 bill. As he slid out of the booth, his mind already on the complex acquisition deal, he did something he never did. He made a mistake. He left his glasses on the table. Clara noticed the glasses almost immediately as she went to clear the table. They were lying next to the salt shaker, a stark, futuristic object in the diner's folksy analog world. They were not ordinary glasses. The frame was crafted from a matte, dark grey titanium that seemed to absorb the light. The design was minimalist, elegant, and unlike any brand she had ever seen. But it was the lenses that made her pause. They were perfectly clear, but as she picked them up, she saw a faint, almost invisible circuitry etched within the glass itself, shimmering with a soft, cyan light when they caught the diner's fluorescent glow. They looked less like prescription eyewear and more like something from a science fiction film. She held them in her hand. They were surprisingly lightweight, but felt solid, expensive, and profoundly important. A wave of panic washed over her. The quiet man in the tweed jacket had seemed so lost in his thoughts. These glasses were clearly essential to him. His work, his life, could be contained within them. Her first instinct was to put them in the diner's lost and found box, a dusty cardboard container under the counter, filled with forgotten scarves and a single sad mitten. But that felt wrong. It felt like a dereliction of duty. This man was a stranger, but he had been her customer. In her simple, fiercely held code of ethics that created a bond of responsibility. "Everything all right, honey?" Mrs. Henderson, the diner's owner, asked, noticing her staring at the strange glasses. "A customer left these," Clara said, holding them up. The quiet man from the corner booth. "They seem important." "He can't have gotten far," Mrs. Henderson said, peering out the rain-streaked front window. "He only left a minute ago. But this storm is getting worse." The rain was coming down in sheets now, a torrential wind-whipped deluge that turned the street outside into a grey, blurry river. The thought of going out into that was deeply unappealing. She was at the end of a long, tiring double shift. Her feet ached, and she still had to get home and face the looming pile of unpaid bills. But then she thought of the man, of the focused, intense look on his face. She imagined his panic when he realized his essential, irreplaceable glasses were gone. Her integrity, a trait inherited from her brilliant but honorable father, made the decision for her. "I have to try and catch him," she said, already untying her apron. "Clara, you'll be soaked to the bone," Mrs. Henderson protested. "He's a grown man. He'll figure it out. He'll come back for them." "Maybe," Clara said, tucking the precious glasses securely into the inner pocket of her jacket. "But what if he doesn't? I couldn't live with that." Without another word, she grabbed her thin, inadequate coat and pushed open the diner door, the bell announcing her departure with a cheerful, ironic jingle. She plunged into the blinding, freezing rain, her eyes scanning the street for a man in a tweed jacket, a simple, honest waitress on a sudden, desperate quest to return a piece of a world she couldn't begin to understand. The street outside the diner was a chaotic watercolor of blurred headlights and glistening asphalt. The rain was relentless, plastering Clara's hair to her face and seeping through her thin coat with an icy chill. She scanned the street, her heart pounding. The quiet man had been on foot. He couldn't have gone far. She saw a figure in a tweed jacket, about a block down, heading towards the old industrial park on the edge of town. "Sir," she called out, her voice nearly swallowed by the roar of the storm. "Excuse me, sir," She broke into a run, dodging puddles and splashing through the torrents of water that flooded the gutters. She was gaining on him, her breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. As she rounded the corner onto a darker, less trafficked side street, a large black luxury sedan suddenly swerved to the curb, its tires hissing on the wet pavement, cutting off her path. The passenger side door swung open, and a man emerged, holding a large black umbrella. He was handsome, in a slick, predatory way, dressed in an expensive, perfectly tailored suit that seemed impervious to the rain. His smile was all teeth. Well, in a hurry, are we? He said, his voice, a smooth, condescending purr. Clara stopped, startled and wary. "Excuse me," she said, trying to move around him. "I'm trying to catch someone." The man blocked her path, his smile widening. "I think the person you're looking for is the person I'm looking for," he said, his eyes flicking down to the slight bulge in her jacket pocket where she had secured the glasses. A quiet fellow. Tweed jacket. Looks like a lost professor. Am I right? A chill colder than the rain ran down Clara's spine. How could this man know that? "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice tight with a sudden protective instinct. "Oh, I think you do," the man said, taking a step closer. He was flanked now by a second, much larger man who had emerged from the driver's side of the car. "You see, my name is Marcus Thorne, and I have a vested interest in speaking with Mr. Alistair Vance. You, I believe, have something that belongs to him. Something I would be very, very interested in acquiring." Alistair Vance. The name meant nothing to Clara, but the man's aggressive, intimidating demeanor set off every alarm bell in her head. "I don't have anything that belongs to you," she said, clutching her jacket pocket. "Now, if you'll excuse me." Thorne's smile vanished, replaced by a look of cold, hard impatience. "Let's not make this difficult," he said. "The glasses. I know you have them. I've been following Vance all day, waiting for an opportunity. He's a ghost, you see. Impossible to get a meeting with. But those glasses, they are his entire life. His key to everything. You give them to me, and I will make it worth your while. I'll give you $10,000. Cash. Right now." $10,000. The number was a stunning, life-altering sum. It was enough to pay off a huge chunk of her father's debt, to stop the foreclosure to save the workshop. For a fleeting, desperate moment, she was tempted. All she had to do was hand over a pair of glasses that didn't belong to her. But then she thought of her father, a man who had been a genius, but had died penniless. His integrity, the only real asset he had ever possessed. She thought of the quiet man in the diner, of the trust she had felt in her duty to return his lost property. "They're not for sale," she said, her voice a low, fierce whisper. "They're not mine to sell." Thorne's face contorted with rage. "You foolish little girl," he snarled. "Do you have any idea what you are turning down? Do you know who you are dealing with?" He nodded to the large man beside him, who took a menacing step toward Clara. It was in this tense, terrifying moment, as the large man reached for her, that another voice cut through the sound of the rain, a voice of quiet, absolute command. "That's enough, Thorne." All three of them turned toward the voice. Standing at the end of the alley, partially obscured by the driving rain, was the quiet man from the diner. He was no longer the unassuming academic. He stood with a stillness, a coiled intensity that was far more intimidating than Thorne's blustering aggression. His tweed jacket was soaked, but his gaze was sharp and focused. Marcus Thorne's jaw dropped. The color drained from his face. He looked as if he had just seen a ghost. "Vance." He breathed the name, a mixture of shock, fear, and utter disbelief. Alistair Vance walked slowly forward, his eyes never leaving Thorne's. He completely ignored the large man, who seemed to shrink under his gaze, and came to a stop a few feet from Clara. "I believe you were just trying to illegally acquire my property," Alistair said, his voice dangerously calm. "And you were harassing this young woman in the process. That was unwise." Thorne, recovering from his initial shock, tried to regain his swagger. "Vance, what a coincidence. I was just having a chat with your associate, trying to get a meeting. You're a hard man to pin down." "I am not a hard man to pin down for people I wish to speak with, Marcus," Alistair replied, his voice like ice. "You are not on that list, and this young woman is not my associate. She is a private citizen who you are currently intimidating on a public street. I suggest you and your gorilla get back in your car and leave. Now." The sheer, unadulterated power in Alistair's voice was absolute. He had not raised his voice. He had not made a threat. He had simply stated a fact. Thorne, a man who understood the brutal calculus of power, knew he was beaten. He was a shark who had just come face to face with a great white. He gave Alistair a look of pure, venomous hatred, then shot a disgusted glare at Clara. With a curt nod to his driver, he got back into the black sedan. The car sped away, its tires spraying a wave of dirty water, leaving a sudden, profound silence in its wake. Alistair finally turned to Clara. The cold, intimidating mask of the billionaire warrior vanished, replaced by an expression of profound, genuine concern. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice now soft. "He didn't hurt you?" Clara, her heart still hammering against her ribs, could only shake her head. She was soaked, freezing, and terrified, but she was unharmed. She reached into her jacket pocket, her fingers closing around the cool, smooth frame of the glasses. "You forgot these," she said, her voice a trembling whisper as she held them out to him. Alistair looked at the glasses in her hand, then back at her face, at her honest, rain-streaked and courageous expression. A look of dawning, incredible wonder came over him. He had spent his life surrounded by people who would do anything to take what was his, and this young woman, this waitress, had just run through a rainstorm, faced down a corporate predator, and turned down a life-changing sum of money, all for the simple, honest purpose of returning his lost property. In his cynical transactional world, it was an act of integrity so pure it was almost incomprehensible. "Thank you," he said, the words full of a weight and a sincerity that went far beyond the simple return of a lost item. He took the glasses from her, his fingers briefly brushing against hers. "My car is just around the corner. Please allow me to take you home. It is the absolute least I can do." As they walked, a new, unspoken understanding passed between them. The quiet man from the diner had been revealed as a ghost of immense power, and the simple, honest waitress had been revealed as a person of immense, unshakable character. In the middle of a storm on a dark side street in a forgotten town, two worlds had collided, and neither of them would ever be the same. Alistair's car was not a flashy limousine, but a discreet, dark grey Audi, its interior a sanctuary of quiet, understated luxury. He insisted Clara sit in the front, and he turned the heat up to its highest setting. As the warm air began to chase the chill from her bones, she finally allowed the full, surreal weight of the past hour to sink in. She had been threatened, offered a bribe, and then rescued by a reclusive billionaire who had been masquerading as an ordinary man. Who was that man? She asked, her voice still a little shaky. Marcus Thorne Alistair replied, his eyes fixed on the rain-slicked road. He's a rival, a vulture. He specializes in hostile takeovers of struggling tech companies. He knew I was in town for the robotics firm, and he was trying to get an edge. He glanced at her. The glasses you were holding, they're not just glasses. They're a prototype, an augmented reality interface. They contain years of my research. To him, they would have been worth millions. You have no idea what you just protected, Clara." His use of her first name was a small but significant shift. The professional distance was dissolving. "And you, Alistair Vance," she said, testing the name. "They call you the Ghost of Silicon Valley." She had heard the name, of course, in hushed, reverent tones on the business news channels she sometimes watched at the diner. Alistair let out a dry, humorless laugh. "A ridiculous, melodramatic nickname. I simply value my privacy." He drove her to her small, modest apartment above the bakery. When he saw the worn, slightly shabby building, a new, deeper understanding seemed to settle on his face. He saw the stark contrast between her world and his, and it seemed to make her act of integrity even more profound. "You turned down $10,000, he stated, his voice a murmur of disbelief. "That money, it could have made a real difference to you, couldn't it?" Clara thought of the pile of foreclosure notices on her kitchen table. "Yes," she admitted, quietly. "It could have." "Then why didn't you take it?" He asked the question, genuine, not accusatory. She looked out at the rain-streaked street. "Because it wasn't my decision to make," she said simply. "They weren't my glasses to sell. My father, he didn't have much money, but he was a man of his word. He taught me that your integrity is the one thing no one can take from you, but you can give it away. And $10,000 isn't worth that." The simple, powerful honesty of her words seemed to strike him with the force of a physical blow. He was silent for a long moment. "Tell me about your father," he said softly. And so she did. In the warm, quiet cocoon of the car, she told him everything. She told him about David Miller, the brilliant, obsessive inventor. She told him about the dusty workshop, about the years of tireless work, about the revolutionary potential of photonic weaving. And she told him about the debt, the bank, and the impending foreclosure auction that was about to destroy her father's life's work. As she spoke, Alistair listened with a new, intense focus. He was no longer just the grateful recipient of a kind act. He was Alistair Vance, the venture capitalist, the man who had built his empire on identifying and investing in disruptive technologies. This photovoltaic fiber," he said, his voice sharp with a new professional excitement. "What's its efficiency rating?" "Over 40% in lab tests," she replied, "and it's completely flexible. It can be woven into almost any material." Alistair's eyes widened. The industry standard for flexible solar was barely half that. "I need to see it." He said the words a command, not a request. "Now." She took him to the workshop. It was a large, cluttered and dusty space, a chaotic temple to a brilliant mind. Blueprints were tacked to the walls, half-finished prototypes lay on workbenches, and the air was thick with the scent of solder and ozone. To an outsider, it was a mess. To Alistair Vance, it was a treasure trove. Clara, her earlier hesitation, now replaced by a passionate filial pride, began to explain her father's work. She showed Alistair the complex schematics, the material samples, the logbooks filled with her father's meticulous, detailed notes. She spoke with a fluency and a deep technical understanding that stunned him. She was not just the inventor's daughter. She was his intellectual heir. Alistair walked through the workshop, his expert eye taking in everything. He touched a swatch of the woven fabric, its surface cool and smooth. He examined a small prototype, a simple canvas bag with the fibers woven into it, connected to a small LED light that was now glowing softly, powered by the dim ambient light of the workshop. Then he stopped. He was staring at a large, complex diagram on the main wall, a blueprint for what was clearly her father's ultimate vision, a large-scale deployable solar fabric designed for disaster relief and military applications. His face, which had been alight with professional excitement, suddenly went pale. He walked closer to the blueprint, his gaze fixed on a particular series of equations in the bottom corner equations that dealt with energy storage and distribution. He turned to Clara, his expression one of pure, stunned, almost cosmic disbelief. This, he said, his voice a hoarse whisper, as he pointed to the equations. This is the solution. He reached into his jacket and pulled out his own tablet, the one he had been working on in the diner. He swiped through a series of complex diagrams and simulations and showed her the screen. For the past 5 years, he explained, his voice full of a new, reverent awe. My company has been trying to solve the single biggest problem in renewable energy, large-scale, decentralized energy storage. We have the generation, we have the grid, but we have no efficient way to store and deploy power on a massive, flexible scale. The problem is in the distribution matrix. The math it never worked. He pointed to his own screen, then to the blueprint on the wall. This, he said, his voice cracking with emotion. Your father, he solved it. This equation, this elegant, beautiful piece of work. It's the missing piece. It's the key. I have spent $1 billion and hired the world's best minds to find this. And it's been here all along, in a dusty workshop in Harmony Creek. The full staggering weight of the coincidence, of the sheer impossible fate of it all descended upon them. Alistair Vance had not just been in town for a robotics firm. He had been unknowingly circling the very solution to his life's greatest professional challenge. And the one thing that had led him to it was not a business meeting or a data analysis, but a pair of forgotten glasses and the unwavering simple integrity of a waitress who had run out into the rain. The revelation in the workshop hung in the air between them, a moment of such profound, almost cosmic serendipity that it left them both breathless. The world had, in a single stunning instant, rearranged itself. Alistair, the cynical ghost of Silicon Valley, had found his holy grail not in a sterile lab or a high-powered boardroom, but in the dusty, brilliant legacy of a man he had never met. And Clara, the struggling waitress on the brink of losing everything, had just discovered that the pile of her father's crazy ideas was, in fact, one of the most valuable intellectual properties on the planet. But their shared moment of awe was brutally short-lived, punctured by the harsh, unyielding reality of the clock. The auction? Clara said, her voice a panicked whisper as she looked at her watch. It's tomorrow morning, at 10. The excitement on Alistair's face was immediately replaced by a look of cold, strategic focus. He was no longer the awestruck innovator. He was the ruthless venture capitalist again, and he was now facing his favorite kind of problem, a high-stakes, time-sensitive battle with a clearly defined enemy. Thorne, he said the name, a low growl. He's not just in town for the robotics firm. He knows about this. He knows about your father's work. Clara nodded, her own mind racing, as she replayed the confrontation in the alley. He said he had a vested interest. He was trying to get the patents to get your glasses. He must have known they were connected. He didn't know they were connected, Alistair corrected her, his mind already piecing together the corporate espionage. He was pursuing 2 separate lines of attack. He knew I was in town, and stealing my prototype would have been a massive coup. And he has been circling your father's estate for months, trying to get his hands on the patents. He's been the one pressuring the bank, using his financial leverage to force the foreclosure. He wants to buy your father's life's work for pennies on the dollar at a public auction. The full ugly scope of Marcus Thorne's predatory scheme was now clear. He was not just a rival. He was a vulture, seeking to profit from her father's death and her own desperation. "Can we stop it?" Clara asked, a desperate hope in her voice. "Can we go to the bank? Show them this." She gestured around the workshop. Alistair shook his head, a grim, pragmatic look on his face. "No, the foreclosure is a legal process. The debt is real. The bank has every right to call the auction. Thorne has them in his pocket. It would take weeks to fight this in court. We have less than 12 hours. A wave of despair washed over Clara. After this incredible, miraculous discovery, were they still going to lose it all? Was her father's legacy still destined to be stolen by a man like Marcus Thorne? "So what do we do?" she asked, her voice trembling. Alistair looked around the workshop at the blueprints, at the prototypes, at the glowing LED on the canvas bag. He then looked at Clara, at the fierce, intelligent, and deeply honorable woman standing before him. A slow, dangerous, and utterly confident smile spread across his face. It was the smile of a predator who had just been handed an insurmountable advantage. "We do not stop the auction," he said, his voice full of a new, thrilling energy. "We let it proceed. Let Thorne think he has won. Let him walk into that auction room tomorrow, confident and arrogant." And then he paused, his grey eyes glittering with the thrill of the fight. "We are going to do what I do best. We are going to change the rules of the game." He pulled out his phone and began to dial his fingers, moving with a familiar, decisive speed. "Eleanor," he said, when his assistant answered, "get me our head of M&A, Michael Chen, and then get me the president of the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia. Wake him up if you have to. We are about to make a very significant overnight acquisition." He was no longer just helping a waitress. He was protecting his own future, his company's future, and the legacy of a man he now felt a profound, almost spiritual connection to. Marcus Thorne was expecting a fight over a small, bankrupt workshop in a forgotten Rust Belt town. He had no idea he was about to go to war with the ghost of Silicon Valley. The eve of destruction had just become the eve of a spectacular, unprecedented reckoning. The community hall where the foreclosure auction was being held was a drab, cavernous room that smelled of stale coffee and desperation. The handful of attendees were a collection of local scrap merchants and small-time real estate speculators, all hoping to pick up a piece of the town's decaying industrial past for a bargain. And then there was Marcus Thorne. He sat in the front row, a shark in a paddling pool, his expensive Italian suit a stark contrast to the worn work clothes of the other bidders. He radiated an aura of smug, predatory confidence, flanked by two of his lawyers. He had been waiting for this moment for months. The Miller workshop, with its portfolio of intriguing but unproven patents, was about to be his for a fraction of its potential worth. Clara and Alistair sat at the back of the room. Alistair was once again in his unassuming tweed jacket, looking more like a curious observer than a global titan of industry. Clara was a bundle of nerves, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. Alistair had been maddeningly, cryptically silent about his plan, saying only, "Trust the process, Clara, and enjoy the show." The auctioneer, a fast-talking local man, began the proceedings. After a few minor lots of office furniture and old machinery, he came to the main event. "All right, folks," he began. "Next up is Lot 7, the property and all associated intellectual assets of the Miller Innovation Workshop, a prime piece of industrial real estate with a portfolio of patents related to solar technology." He clearly had no idea of their true value. "We'll open the bidding at the outstanding debt value of $250,000. 300,000. Thorne called out immediately, his voice a bored, dismissive boom designed to scare off any other potential bidders. The other attendees who had been hoping to pick up the property for its land value immediately fell silent. They knew they couldn't compete with the man in the expensive suit. 300,000 going once the auctioneer called. Going twice. Clara's heart was in her throat. She looked at Alistair, her eyes wide with panic. He simply sat there, his expression perfectly calm, giving a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head. "Wait," he seemed to be saying. "Sold," the auctioneer cried, banging his small wooden gavel. "To the gentleman in the front row, for $300,000. A triumphant reptilian smile spread across Marcus Thorne's face. He had won. It was over. He turned in his seat and shot a mocking, victorious look back at Clara. It was in that moment of his triumph that the main doors at the back of the hall swung open. A woman in a sharp, impeccably tailored business suit, flanked by two other serious-looking individuals, strode into the room. "Stop this auction," she commanded, her voice ringing with an authority that made the auctioneer freeze his gavel halfway to the block for the next item. "This proceeding is no longer valid." Thorne leaped to his feet. "What is the meaning of this? Who are you?" The woman looked at him with an expression of cool, professional disdain. "My name is Sarah Jennings. I am the chief counsel for Vance Capital, and I am here to represent the new owners of the financial institution that holds the debt on this property, the Harmony Creek Community Bank." A wave of stunned confusion washed over the room. Jennings continued her gaze fixed on the auctioneer. "As of 7:00 a.m. this morning, my client, Mr. Alistair Vance, completed the acquisition of a 100% controlling interest in Harmony Creek Community Bank. As the new owner of the bank and therefore the primary creditor, he has instructed me to immediately and formally forgive the entirety of the outstanding debt on the Miller Innovation Workshop." She held up a signed, notarized document. "The loan is satisfied. The foreclosure is void. This auction is over." The collective gasp in the room was audible. Marcus Thorne stared at her, his face a mask of pure apoplectic disbelief. It was an impossible, unthinkable move. No one buys a bank to settle a minor foreclosure. He whipped his head around to look at the back of the room, his eyes finally landing on the quiet man in the tweed jacket. The unassuming professor. The ghost of Silicon Valley. He was smiling. Thorne breathed his voice a choked whisper of rage and dawning, horrified comprehension. Alistair Vance slowly rose to his feet. "You were right about one thing, Thorne," he said, his voice carrying easily across the silent room. "The patents are immensely valuable. Far too valuable to be left in the hands of a predatory bottom feeder like you." He walked forward, stopping beside a still reeling Clara. And now he announced, his voice ringing with a new powerful vision. "I am thrilled to announce the formation of a new partnership. A partnership between Vance Capital and the brilliant legacy of David Miller. Together we will be launching a new company dedicated to bringing his revolutionary technology to the world." He placed a hand on Clara's shoulder. "Allow me to introduce you to my partner and the CEO of the newly formed Miller Vance Renewables, Ms. Clara Miller." It was the ultimate hard karma. Marcus Thorne had not just been outbid. He had been outmaneuvered on a scale so grand, so epic, that he had been rendered utterly irrelevant. He had come to the auction to steal a legacy, and he had ended up as a footnote in the creation of a new one. Clara stood there beside Alistair, her heart swelling with a gratitude and an excitement so profound she felt she might burst. She looked around the dusty, unassuming workshop, no longer a place of debt and despair, but the official headquarters of her new future. Her father's dream had not just been saved, it was about to change the world. The auction had been a stunning, decisive victory, but as the adrenaline faded, a new and far more daunting reality set in. Alistair Vance had not just saved a workshop, he had created a company. And Clara Miller, who just days ago had been serving coffee and worrying about a $200 textbook bill, was now the CEO of a revolutionary enterprise partnered with one of the most powerful and enigmatic figures in the tech world. The transition was as terrifying as it was exhilarating. The first few months were a whirlwind of intense, often overwhelming activity. The old dusty workshop, once a place of quiet, solitary invention, was transformed into the bustling nerve center of Miller Vance Renewables. Alistair, with his characteristic, breathtaking efficiency, descended upon Harmony Creek with the force of a benevolent hurricane. Teams of engineers from his labs in Silicon Valley arrived to catalog and analyze every last one of David Miller's prototypes. Legal teams worked around the clock to secure the global patents for the photonic weaving technology, and a construction crew began the careful, respectful renovation of the workshop, preserving its historic character, while upgrading it into a state-of-the-art research and development facility. Alistair was in his element, the master architect of a new venture. He was decisive, brilliant, and moved with a purpose that energized everyone around him. But in this new venture, he was not the sole commander. He had a partner, and he made it clear to his entire high-powered team from day one that Clara's voice was to be considered equal to his own. This was Clara's steepest learning curve. She was suddenly in rooms with world-class patent attorneys, materials, scientists, and marketing gurus, all of whom looked to her for guidance. In the beginning, she was paralyzed by a profound sense of imposter syndrome. She was a waitress with 2 years of community college, surrounded by PhDs and titans of industry. During one particularly grueling strategy session about supply chain logistics, she had remained silent, intimidated by the complex jargon and the confident assertions of Alistair's team. After the meeting, Alistair found her in the old office, staring at a faded photograph of her father. "You were quiet in there," he said gently. "I didn't have anything to add," she admitted, her voice small. "I don't know anything about global supply chains." "No," he said, stepping closer. "But you know the technology better than anyone on this planet. You know your father's vision. I can hire 100 logistics experts, Clara. I can't hire a single person who understands the soul of this company. Your voice is the most important one in that room. Don't ever be afraid to use it." His unwavering belief in her became her anchor. She threw herself into the work, devouring books on business management, asking endless questions, and slowly, surely finding her footing. She discovered that she had inherited her father's intuitive grasp of the technology and possessed her own keen practical intelligence. She began to contribute to the meetings, not with jargon, but with a clear-sighted, common-sense wisdom that often cut through the corporate complexity to the heart of the matter. Their partnership evolved a delicate and effective balance of his strategic genius and her grounded, human-centric vision. He built the corporate structure, and she shaped its culture. She insisted that their first hires be local engineers and technicians from Harmony Creek, people who, like her father, had been overlooked by the coastal tech hubs. She established a company culture based not on ruthless competition, but on collaboration and a shared passion for the work. As they worked side by side, the professional partnership began to bleed into a deeper, more personal one. Late at night, after the engineers had gone home, they would often find themselves alone in the quiet of the workshop, sharing a pizza and talking for hours. He was fascinated by her resilience, her unwavering optimism, and her profound sense of integrity. She was captivated by his brilliant mind, but even more so by the glimpses of the kind, vulnerable man beneath the billionaire's armor. The outside world, however, was not so accepting of their unconventional alliance. Marcus Thorne, though utterly defeated at the auction, was not a man to accept a loss gracefully. Humiliated and enraged, he began a subtle, vicious campaign of whispers against them. He couldn't attack them legally, so he attacked their reputations. He planted stories in industry blogs and financial news outlets, painting Alistair as an erratic, emotionally compromised investor who had been duped by a pretty waitress. The articles questioned the viability of the photonic weaving technology, dismissing it as vaporware, and framed Alistair's billion-dollar investment as a foolish, sentimental folly. The narrative was designed to spook investors and cast a shadow of doubt over Miller Vance Renewables before it even got off the ground. The attack culminated in an open letter, published in a prominent financial journal from a group of concerned shareholders in one of Alistair's public companies, questioning his judgment and his fitness to lead. Alistair knew instantly that Thorne was behind it. He stormed into the workshop one evening, a copy of the journal in his hand, his face a mask of cold fury. "He's trying to poison the well," he said, his voice a low growl. "He's trying to scare my board, to undermine our credibility before we even launch our first product." Clara looked at the article, at the ugly, insinuating words. She felt a surge of anger, but also a strange sense of calm. "So what do we do?" she asked. "We fight back," Alistair said. "I'll have my PR team issue a statement. We'll sue the journal for libel. We will crush him." Clara looked at him, or she said, a slow, confident smile spreading across her face. "We could just prove him wrong." She walked over to a workbench, where a new, sleek prototype lay under a cloth. "The engineers finished the final stress tests this morning. It's ready." It was a large, flexible solar blanket, the first market-ready product based on her father's technology. It was lightweight, durable, and capable of generating enough electricity to power a small field hospital. "Let Thorne and his friends write their little stories," she said, her eyes shining with the same brilliant, innovative light that must have been in her father's. "While they're busy whispering in the dark, we're going to be busy bringing light to the world." Alistair looked from the prototype to her confident, determined face, and his anger dissolved, replaced by a profound sense of awe and admiration. She was right. The ultimate rebuttal to cynicism and deceit was not a lawsuit. It was success. She was not just his partner. She was his inspiration. Clara's strategy of answering the whispers with results was a masterstroke. While Marcus Thorne continued his campaign of innuendo, Miller Vance Renewables went into a quiet, intense period of production. They bypassed the traditional, slow-moving tech launch cycle. Their first move was not a flashy press conference, but a targeted act of revolutionary philanthropy. A massive, devastating hurricane had just torn through the Gulf Coast, leaving a trail of destruction and knocking out the power grid for hundreds of thousands of people. Relief efforts were being hampered by a lack of reliable portable power. Alistair, at Clara's urging, made a single phone call to the head of the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA. The next day, a fleet of cargo planes chartered by Vance Capital began airlifting the entire first production run of the Miller Vance solar blankets, thousands of them directly to the disaster zone. The impact was immediate and profound. Within 48 hours, makeshift medical clinics, communication centers, and community shelters in the hardest-hit areas had reliable, clean power. News crews on the ground initially there to cover the devastation began reporting on the miracle blankets that were appearing in the darkness. The footage was incredible, vast, flexible sheets of dark, shimmering fabric unrolled over rooftops and across fields, silently generating the power that was saving lives. The story exploded, but not in the financial journals or the gossip columns. It was on the national evening news, on the front pages of major newspapers. Vance Renewables was not introduced to the world as a tech startup, but as a beacon of hope in a time of crisis. The narrative was no longer about a controversial billionaire and a mysterious waitress. It was about a revolutionary American technology born in a small-town workshop that was now changing the world. The hard karma for Marcus Thorne was delivered not in a courtroom, but in the court of public opinion. His cynical self-serving attacks were rendered utterly powerless in the face of the undeniable tangible good that Clara and Alistair's company was doing. His whispers were drowned out by a roar of genuine heartfelt praise. His own investors, seeing his petty vendetta backfire so spectacularly, began to pull away. His reputation, once that of a ruthless but effective predator, was now that of a bitter, irrelevant fool who had bet against the future and lost. The success of the FEMA deployment created a tidal wave of demand. Orders poured in from international aid organizations, the Department of Defense, and developing nations seeking to build decentralized, resilient power grids. Vance Renewables became a global phenomenon, a billion-dollar company in its first year. 2 years after the auction, Clara and Alistair stood on a wind-swept hill in a remote village in sub-Saharan Africa. Below them, a new schoolhouse, its roof made entirely of their photonic weaving fabric, was being dedicated. The building was alive with light and the excited chatter of children who for the first time had electricity to power their computers and light their classrooms. Clara was no longer the struggling waitress. She was a respected CAO and a global philanthropist, her father's dream, now a brilliant, world-changing reality. She had finished her degree, but had found that her true calling was here at the helm of the company she had built with Alistair. Alistair stood beside her, his transformation complete. The reclusive, cynical ghost had been replaced by a man who was engaged, passionate, and deeply, profoundly happy. The success of Vance was more satisfying to him than any of his previous purely financial ventures. This was a legacy. Your father would be so proud, Clara. He said, his voice full of a quiet, powerful emotion as he watched the children run out of the schoolhouse. He would be proud of us. She corrected him gently, her hand finding his. Their partnership forged in the chaos of a rainstorm and the crucible of a corporate battle had blossomed into a deep and abiding love. They were a team in every sense of the word, their strengths and visions perfectly intertwined. Later that evening, sitting under a vast star-dusted African sky, Alistair took a small velvet box from his pocket. I know a man who said that integrity is the only thing you can't buy. He began, his voice a low, sincere murmur. He was wrong. There's one other thing. Love. He opened the box. Inside was not a large, flashy diamond, but a simple, elegant ring, its band a delicate woven pattern that mimicked the photovoltaic fibers of their technology. Clara Miller. He said, his heart in his eyes. You are the missing piece to my equation. Will you be my partner in every part of life forever? She looked at him, her own eyes shining with tears of pure, unadulterated joy. Her answer was a simple, heartfelt yes. The story that had started with a pair of forgotten glasses in a small-town diner had led them here to this moment of profound, perfect connection. They were two people who had been lost in their own lonely worlds, brought together by a twist of fate and the quiet integrity of a good deed. And together they would continue to build a future, a legacy and a family, all powered by the simple, revolutionary, and undeniable energy of love. A pair of forgotten glasses, a waitress's unwavering integrity, and a desperate run through a rainstorm. These were the simple, unlikely ingredients that sparked a revolution. Alistair Vance, a man who had walled himself off from the world, discovered that the greatest investment he could ever make was not in a company, but in a person. Clara Miller, a young woman on the brink of losing everything, found the courage to stay true to her principles, and in doing so saved not only her father's legacy, but her own future. Their story is a powerful testament to the idea that a single, selfless act of kindness can change the world, and that the most brilliant innovations are often born from the simple, powerful connection between two people who dare to believe in a better future. If this story of integrity, unexpected partnership, and the triumph of a dream resonated with you, please hit that like button. Share it as a reminder that the smallest good deed can have the biggest impact, and be sure to subscribe for more compelling tales of real-life drama and ultimate justice.